Welcome everyone, this is Grandma Eisen speaking to you, just like a grandma, unable to understand how phones work, being far too close to the camera when doing a FaceTime call. Also, I have to tone down the voice because today I feel like my voice is in danger, so we're gonna have to use a lower tone for today. What we have to go over, however, is the pre-patch that just came out, because we have gotten the Evoker finally playable after the 3 weeks, I think it was, the 3 weeks delay from the original pre-patch. Now we got the full version with the Evoker and with the pre-patch event. Now, I don't want to say I told you, but once we got the delay of the pre-patch, I was pointing out how the pre-patch event itself was quite badly designed and how it didn't really feel that nice. To be fair, most people don't care too much about having fun in the pre-patch event. They mostly care about the freebie loot they're about to accumulate on their alts, their freshly leveled characters, also thanks to the massive leveling boosts we are getting recently. So it doesn't have to be very fun, but the event is so broken that you can basically just AFK on your mount while the normal mobs are out until the world boss, until the big boss of the event spawns, and then you get your essence that way. So it feels kind of half-assed. I'm mostly surprised because I was expecting this version of the pre-patch and this version of the event to be like this 3 weeks ago. I was expecting in 3 weeks time that it would have received some improvements, but instead it's still kind of disappointing as an event. As I said, in the end, it won't really matter because I myself, like many of you, I'm just there for loot. So I'm just gonna show up to get my free gear for the characters I want to level up. Talking about leveling up, talking about characters to play, there is the Evoker playable. So obviously I'm not giving first time impressions because I have played Evoker in the beta already. I have tested it out already in the beta. So I wondered, what was your impression of trying out Evoker for the first time? Because I tried it in the beta in both specs and there was a very clear difference between how Preservation, how the healer works, compared to how the Devastation Evoker works. Because, Preservation does have some nice, unique mechanics. It does have some, I guess, difficult, or you could say complex types of abilities about being cast and then duplicating those abilities or preventing damage or reverting the damage taken. So they don't just have abilities like Dream Breath, which are, very, very simple to understand, but they also have some pretty nifty mechanics. Things like Temporal Anomaly is a pretty good style of ability. Even abilities like Stasis as a cooldown. It does have some nice flavor to the spec. I think overall it's a pretty successfully made, successfully done spec. It does also seem to be quite good in the beta when it comes to balance in both raids and Mythic Plus. The HPS is okay. It's not the strongest right now in the beta, but it is definitely not in the weaker side compared to a few other specs like Resto Shaman, for example. So it's quite nice. And also in Mythic Plus, they have some pretty good burst AoE damage, which is always quite valuable. In Mythic Plus, they can have very strong single target healing in Mythic Plus for their tanks and some oh shit mechanics to save the party, the DPS brains training mechanics. So it's quite nice overall. My bigger concern was with Evoker in their DPS form. I'm sure it's also been the spec you have tried the most when you played Evoker, particularly for the first couple of levels for leveling. You might have went for DPS, obviously. So you might have noticed, of course, that the DPS Evoker Devastation is very, very simple, very, very straightforward, very, very direct in what it does. There is not much of any nuance, much of any delicate rotations or spells you have to weave in your damage cycle. So this could be one of the more polarizing specs because some players like the simplicity of a spec. Maybe they just like how it sounds, how the abilities sound, or how it flows compared to more complicated specs, and then vice versa. Players like to be more engaged in their spec, they like to have more options, they like to have more decision making and control over what they do, whereas for Devastation Evoker this rarely happens. You have your single target generator, Living Flame, and your single target spender, Disintegrate. You have your AoE, spender, and generator, Azure Strike and Pyre, and then you have your big channeled ability, Fire Breath. Besides that, there isn't really much else. As we have seen, and as you will likely get used to, the right side of the tree for Devastation Evoker is where you want to go down to, because you get Shattering Star. That's another extra to your rotation, but it's not really that complex. So it might entice some players. At the end of the day, we see how popular specs like Beast Mastery Hunter or Marksmanship Hunter are, even though they are still very, very simple specs. So I'm pretty sure many players will still enjoy playing Devastation Evoker. I just think perhaps at the very least the options, the choice to be a little bit more complex could have been nice for the talents. And no, if you were wondering, you're still missing 10 talent points. You know, could things shake up massively if you get those extra points for the end of the tree? Because it can happen to other specs to finish their talent setup with those extra talents to change quite a bit in how they work, in how they play. That's not the case for Devastation Evoker, so it's not going to change that much, unfortunately, if you were expecting more complexity out of this DPS spec. I liked, on a side note, I liked the trailers, the cinematics that Blizzard has been pushing out and that we have been seeing in this video. I think it's nice, as other players have mentioned already, it's nice to try to recapture this feeling of having an adventure-themed expansion without a looming intergalactic threat pending over our heads. I think that's pretty nice and a breath of fresh air. Of course, many other cynical players will say, izen, this is not gonna last. There is, of course, going to be some major big bad popping out of somewhere by the end of this expansion. Many are already pointing at Murozond, right? But for the time being, the overall vibe that you get from the expansion has been one of adventure, one of exploration, and much less about a major threat, even as you get to max level in the expansion, as you get to start doing things like daily quests and world quests and the typical end game stuff. It's not really against a major faction, it's not really against a major enemy. It's mostly just single insulated threats in different parts of every zone, rather than the giant enemy. Like, for example, right now in Shadowlands, you have to go against the minions of the jailer, right? The Mawsworn. It's not like that in Dragonflight. It's mostly just evil gnolls in one zone, and then evil birds in some other zone, and then evil elementals in another zone. There is not really a connection with some big evil guy that is responsible for everything. So I thought that was nice. I am a little bit more confused about the excitement for the dwarf character in the cinematic. I might have missed something. Maybe it's a joke. I am too weak to understand right now. I don't know. I guess maybe they were happy that a female dwarf was in a cinematic, perhaps. Okay, fine. But beyond this confusing excitement for this character, I thought they were pretty well done. All of the cutscenes we have just seen for this second part of the pre-patch. So, you know, with this second part of a pre-patch coming out, we are now just a couple of weeks away from the expansion. Looks like most of everything is ready. I am still quite worried about the state of a few specs, but that's not the time to talk about it right now. Let's not try to bring in some more balance tuning talk in yet another video. We will leave that for later, although I think it could end up being a problem by the release of Dragonflight. The rest of the features are already quite done and finished. I haven't really noticed many things missing from the beta, so I think it's pretty polished so far. For example, we saw many players being quite worried about the very early release of the expansion. Many were expecting a release in March or even April, and immediately they pointed out how releasing it so early before the end of this year was going to make the expansion unfinished, the expansion way too early, premature. But from what I've been able to see in the beta, everything looks pretty much done at this point, with as I said, the exception about balancing the specs and the classes, which might turn out to be very important in the end, but besides that, most of the stuff is looking great. So with this being said and done, as what I believe my fever is rising, at least imagine fever. I don't even know if it's a real one. Maybe it's all unironically in my head. We can stop for today. I'm going to leave you to the rest of your, I'm sorry, I don't even know what day is today. The rest of your Thursday, I believe. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of my Patreon supporters for allowing me to continue to produce more content. For all of you guys who enjoy it, I enjoy it too, especially as we get closer to the release of the expansion. There is a lot of stuff to talk about, so I'm pretty excited about that. Also, you can support in other ways, which don't include having to steal your parents' wallet. That is also pretty bad manners, I have to say. So liking and commenting down below on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself, are still pretty sure, I believe, completely free ways to support me. So that's another way for you to help. Lastly, for the social part of this whole deal, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon, which will give you access as well to my Discord server. Now, with this said and done, I can go and rest my voice. I have my tea brewing in my kitchen for my sore throat, so I have to go and pick it up. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, by the way, it's not that bad as it looks. I'm just quite weak, and for some reason my throat got sore all of a sudden. That's just it. I'm not on my deathbed.